Thank you so much for listening to Urbanistica podcast. I am Mustafa Sharif, an urban planner, and you're more than welcome to join my big journey of exploring the making of smarter and more livable cities. Please don't forget to follow Urbanistica on the different social media platforms, and also let's connect on LinkedIn. Big thanks to Urbanistica podcast partner, AFRY. AFRY is an international engineering and design company providing sustainable solutions in the fields of energy, industry, and infrastructure. Are you ready for a new episode? Let's go for it. So I have the pleasure to welcome Shereen and Margaret to Urbanistica podcast. Hey, and welcome.
Hi, thank you so much for having us.
My pleasure. How are you doing? How's it going in Stockholm?
Great. We've got a fresh bed of snow outside, so that's nice. It's a little brighter.
How are you doing, Shereen?
Great. So excited to be here with you and with Margaret. And as you said, we're from a new podcast studio. So hopefully we'll have many more of these in the future. Looking forward to it. Thanks.
Yeah. And hopefully next time we do it in Urbanistica studio, ERL.
Amazing.
Oh,
cool.
Exciting.
So let's start with you. You are our storytellers. Let's start with you, Shereen. How would you like to introduce yourself? And please tell us about your passion.
Okay, well, I'll start with my passion first. I love all things to do with interconnectivity. So how we as humans interconnect with one another and how we interact with nature. And that's become my passion over time. So through the philosophy of yoga and reading about sort of how the cognitive head marries with the legacy heart and the environmental body, that sort of ignited my passion for all things around nature and humanity, and just really helping ourselves to live the best life that we can. And that's become sort of my passion point. And I originally started in advertising, and then had about 5 years ago a sort of a crisis of faith. I'd been creating many purposes for great brands for a very long time, about 20 years, and I thought, what a great opportunity to actually use that in a slightly different way and try and think of a different way of creating purpose and good intention in the way that we do business today. So that's become sort of how I've combined what I love with how I work. And yeah.
I love it. So interesting journey. Tell us more about your background. Like, what did you study? What did you work before? And also, where are you based now?
So I'm based now in Stockholm, in Sweden, which I love. I've been here for about a year. I'm a COVID implant. I'm originally from London, but I lived in New York for a very, very long time, which I loved. And I had worked in communications in advertising for about 20 years at some of the big shops, which I adored. But I often say that I was also probably a little bit part of the eco-genocide that has taken hold of the world, because I spent the majority of my life on a plane flying around to visit clients. And whilst that was an amazing experience and I'm so grateful for it, I'm now probably trying to burn through a bit of karma. Yeah.
Yeah, well, welcome to Stockholm.
Thank you so much. I love it.
Yeah. So, Margaret, thank you so much again for emailing, for organizing this. I'm so happy to get in touch with you, and finally we are doing it. So
I know. Oh, I've been such a fan of your podcast, and we've been in touch for almost a year now.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah,
You've been trying to get me on to talk about something, and I'm just so passionate about this subject. So I hope that shows through our enthusiasm and passion.
Thank you so much for being here. And yeah, let's also tell us, how would you like to introduce yourself and tell us about your passion?
Okay, well, I always start with my education, because it really has defined a lot of who I am. So I'm an architect by education and trade. I had about 10 years or around a decade in New York City, where I worked as pretty much an architect in the traditional sense, lots of construction site visits. But as a person who's really lets her curiosity drive her, I slowly started to move away from the architecture field. I was I'm inspired by other branches, and back when I started to shift away, I was looking at in particular advertising and marketing, digital marketing, and I felt like that they were taking us a more advanced step than we were in the architecture field, and I was really curious to learn more. So I left the branch completely. And at that point, I was in Stockholm. I had already moved to Stockholm from New York. And so I worked for a while, completely took off the architect hat. And then I started at White Arkitekter, where I work now, about 5 years ago. So I came back into the branch with this whole bed of background and knowledge and passion that I wanted to really contribute. And so that's where I am today.
I love it. So how do you know each other?
So we have a mutual friend who actually used to live in Stockholm, but she's in about an hour from Barcelona. And she called me up one day and she said, I have a friend that you might get along with. I'm not really sure. Would you like to meet her? And I was like, sure. And we were both kind of like, oh, okay, whatever. And we had a lunch together, and it was really the start of we had a lot of common interest, and the project that I was working on for a circular resort destination in Indonesia was sort of paralleling her journey working with the hospitality branch. And so I call Shereen my COVID friend, because, and that's why we can safely sit this close together. we're in a little tiny room, and we're probably really spreading the virus around this. No, I'm kidding. And so what is sort of which probably would have sounded like a work conversation outside of our table, was just really where we've sort of saw these synergies. And as I mentioned, I'm always inspired by other thought leaders, and I felt like I had a lot to learn from Shereen. And eventually, let's see, I think it was about a year into the conversation, we decided in October, let's do something about this. Let's really, because it was at a time, at the beginning of COVID in February, March, when the world was slowing down, but we weren't ready to slow down. We thought there's something that we both had the urge and a momentum to do something. And so we decided to really channel our energy. And that's what this project's about. So it combines all the things we love into one loving ball, loving ball of fun. Yeah. No, but I mean, as Shereen had mentioned, with her field, as you know, with the architecture industry, we're so linked to construction, and there's so much improvement to be done, and I love the fact that we can do something that's really practice-based, and also can practice-based research, which we can implement. And in particular, our project, which touches everyone's lives in some way or another.
Yeah, very interesting. And like great projects need fund and so on. So how did you manage to start with it, at least?
Well, from my standpoint, I applied for we call it the White Research Lab Fund, and it's for it's an allocation of hours and for practice-based research. So White has about 5% of the revenue that goes in towards research, and it's such a wonderful opportunity. So I applied in October, and it was a bit of a catalyst for the start of our work.
Yeah, and from my point of view, we, as Margaret said, the acceleration because of the impact of this current market disruptor was so great. I was working when I arrived for Royal Park and on a sustainability project, and because of COVID, it was put on hold. But what actually then came to be was the co-founding of the Royal Park Hospitality Hub, which is now the researcher in this project, and what it's actually uncovered is this a sort of great awakening that can come from this disruptor that of COVID, and we saw this as a huge opportunity for us to be able to say, okay, what's the real market need? Like what's really going on? And pragmatism has become like the essential word for us here. So it's, because even though we've both got a passion for sustainability and how regeneration impacts the hospitality environment and the built environment, it was around, okay, there's massive financial impacts that are going on in this industry. And so how does this conversation around regeneration and sustainability not get put to the side and actually can be accelerated along with sort of the other behavioral changes that are going on? So from the hub's perspective, we matched the white quota of hours so that together we could come up with this basis of scenario planning and research to hopefully then jump off into another level of research. So it's almost like there's never ending amounts to this project. It's sort of, as the momentum builds, so does the project. So that's how we had approached it, a really sort of agile, evolving project, as opposed to there's an end, because we wanted to really look into what do new types of collaborations look like. How do we and sort of put new business models into place and actually show that in real life working practice.
Well, that's amazing. So tell me, Shereen, about the research question. Like, how did you shape it? Did it take a lot of time?
So as Margaret said, we've probably been kicking around a question for about since we met in February. Yeah. So, it's true. Our conversations of interest to us probably do sound like work if people overhear them. So we've been, we were talking about our different situations and scenarios, and then as that developed over time, we noticed that there was a real sort of need to understand what was going on in the hospitality sector, and that looked really different according to global markets. And that was the really interesting thing for this, right? Because you can get slightly in a bubble with things, right? So there's the Swedish bubble that's going on, and then there's the European bubble that's happening, and as we started to talk to other markets, so we spoke to Asia a lot, and some markets in Middle East, Africa. There were different things happening, and we were like, okay, how can we start to disseminate these learnings? How do we actually start to really look at that? So in October, we then sat down, and the question sort of, it came up through two key points. One was around the slowing of the world, yet the acceleration of behavioral change. So that's the first bit of the question. So sort of in this slowing, yet the sort of facing the acceleration of behavioral change and the unknown, how does the resiliency of an industry come back with sustainable impact? And that was the genesis of our question. So the actual question wound up being around sort of in the slowing and the facing of the unknown. How can a previously resilient industry come back with accelerated sustainable impact? And that was that's the genesis of our question.
Did it take a lot of time to arrive to this clear question?
Probably a lot of discussion, not so much time. So yeah, I think that's the truth. I think that we had put in a lot of pre-thinking to the question. But because we wanted to make sure that there was pragmatism in the question. And so that's probably what took the most time for us.
Yeah, and always, and linked to the business model, business case was important to us as well, both from both industries, actually, that it was important that that we could create a way to, a way to get to a desired result especially through long-term planning. As we said before, that the hospitality industry is it's extremely resilient. It's a very resilient industry, and it's always been that way. But it's resilient because it's been knee-jerking. It changes based on what's happening in the world, and we thought it could benefit from a long-term planning perspective with the circular economy, circular thinking in mind, regeneration, And one sentence that we throw around a lot is adaptive reuse. So like a beloved building is a sustainable building. So instead of building new all the time, take what's there. And hospitality is an industry where they love to build new. Rip it down, start up. And especially in areas where nothing exists. That's like the ultimate. But we're asking the sort of the deeper questions. How can we change habits and behavior for long-term perspective, long-term resiliency?
Yeah, very, very interesting question, actually. So I'm now super curious to know, like, what is the method you use in order to answer this question? But by the way, when did you start?
End of October, early November.
Okay, like it's not
2020.
3 months ago.
Yeah.
Acceleration is the key.
We've accelerated, but it feels like we've been working. Not working. It feels like we've been discussing this because we keep saying for a long time. But it's
many lunches.
Many lunches, many bottles of wine.
It's also, I mean, also there's a swell around us in the hub where we work, where the idea of conscious hospitality, they've been working with that for about 2 years now. So what does conscious really mean in terms of the hospitality world? And we were saying, well, this is an awakening of humans, right? So this is a general awakening. So now if the industry can awaken too, and this touches everyone, like the built environment, and we're looking at hospitality from a wider definition as well. So, defined as sort of it's technically defined as the friendly and generous reception and entertainment of guests, visitors, and strangers. And so from a hub's perspective, we're saying, well, actually, that's a social value, right? So if we are hospitable to one another and create hospitable environments, then actually we can start to use that awakening to really impact change. And so that's why it was like, okay, the time is now. The time is really now.
Let's do it. Yeah, exactly. I love it. Yeah. So Margaret, tell me about what methods you use and how did you do that?
Okay, so we started breaking down, looking at these sort of terminologies that end up not being full of meaning anymore. So if you use the term greenwashing, words that throw around, even the word sustainability. And we really looked at a regenerative, like we looked at those different words and what they actually mean, and to sort of use that as a basis. And then so we decided to invite for interviews 5 people from the hospitality industry and 5 people from White. And the people from White were all different. There was sustainability, or she's what is she? I was going to say anthropologist, social anthropologist. I want to get her term proper. So then we had an urban planner. We had an architect that's worked with hotels and other arenas and that sort of thing. We have another architect who is coming from a strong healthcare industry background. We thought that was extremely important.
Yeah.
Did I miss someone?
No.
Yeah. Okay. So we have those 5, and then we have 5 people from the hospitality industry. So we have people from the operations standpoint. We have people, someone from the concierge. We have someone from the CEOs, COOs, marketing. So I hope I'm not missing anyone.
Owners and operators.
Right. So it was very important for me to understand the difference between the owner, the property owner, the asset owner, and the operator, and how they often have conflict, and to get both sides of those opinions. So we did this, the interviews, about an hour or so, and we filmed them. So there were 3 of us. The CEO from the hub was with, so we had 3 people. His name is Bo Anderson. So we were the panel, and then we had one person at a time being interviewed, which was recorded and filmed, and we used that to listen to it afterwards and to really hear. And so they each had 7 questions. So I asked the questions to the hospitality industry, and Shereen asked to the architecture industry.
Can you share with us like some of the questions?
So
no,
do
you
remember them?
Well, some of them, yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
some of them.
We started with all of them of the. I mean, I suppose it's a usual question, but really, what keeps them up at night? Because the reason why we flipped the interviews around was that so we wouldn't come with any preconceptions. So for projections or anything of what we thought in terms of architecture versus hospitality industries, because we really wanted these interviews to be deep listening. So, and by that, really like letting people have the space to tell us their true answer, and then the reason why we filmed them so we could listen to what was really going on beneath. And that was the critical element of this. And what we found, which was quite magical actually, is most people spent more than an hour with us because they really wanted to share and to really be heard. And that was one of the key things. I think that we sort of underestimate often how stressful this situation is for people, and actually in the sharing of their thoughts, it became a really interesting way to sort of really listen to the stresses that were happening and understanding kind of the things that lie beneath. And that's what this was about. It became a really interesting process, and and in the end, I think even some people stayed a couple of hours with us.
And almost all cases, we have the list of questions, and there were of course about 3 really important key points that we wanted to bring up. But in most cases, they just spoke, and they were easy interviews because we didn't have to keep. It was just they were so willing to speak, and we're so thankful because they really shared a lot, both from a personal level and from an operational business level. So it was fantastic in that way.
And that's what was really uplifting as well, because everyone was wanting to come together in a truly collaborative way to solve the industry issues around this. So it became so refreshing because, this sort of, yes, there's huge pressure and as we discussed, financial pressure, but in the talking of solutions and how that comes to be, the theme of collaboration was just huge, and different types of collaboration, and how people wanted to work cross countries. And so competition aside for the moment in the solving of the problem, and then afterwards, but yeah.
So Margaret, you had 10 different interviews. And what was the next step?
So then it was actually putting together a white paper, and it's about a 20-page document, and writing everything down, and just documenting with quotes. We also did a considerable amount of desk research, cross-referencing whatever we could find. And that's actually quite interesting as well, is that we haven't found that much or hardly anything really that's relating to this topic in terms of the hospitality and the built environment, those two together. So there's very so in some ways that's it's probably better because we're really, but it also makes it more difficult. It makes it more difficult because we really have to put on the thinking cap, but to do something that's different and helpful and pragmatic to problem solving really is what it's about. So that's so that has been submitted to White, to the research lab. So that's where we are right now.
Well done.
As of yesterday.
I understand when you try to Google and find out some references, and it's a kind of empty. You don't really find what you want, so you feel like you're alone. But at the same time, it gives you more push to that you contribute with what you do. So I know how this feeling. And Shereen, I would love to hear more. What are the conclusions? Tell us.
So this was the interesting thing. So after we looked through, we obviously rewatched all of the the films again. And then we went through our research again because we wanted to remove any bias. It was really critical that we were keeping objective about it, because it was, these are such unknown times. There is no known solution. So to your point, Google away, but there's no spit out this business model because it's a silver bullet of going to work. So I wish we all had that, because then we'd have the crystal ball and it would all be great. So we really combed it for the themes. So we came up with 5 critical theme areas. The first one is around governance and systematic governance, and by that we don't mean government in like terms of policy. We mean, how does the owner of a project, and whether it be an owner as an asset owner or an operator owner, whoever is the sort of working to bring the project together, how does that governance of the project really come into play for a higher purpose? So, whether it's around looking at urban farming in built environment, or whether it's around multi-purpose use, or whatever the goal of it is, what actually is the reason for the project to be, what's its legacy, and then how do you keep that governance alive? How does the implementation of that become critical? And there were common threads of people saying, once a project is beloved and it becomes a really beloved project, then that becomes much easier to sell the vision, to work with people, collaborators. We had people talking about the importance of partners understanding the governance structure. So that became a really clear theme. And the differential that we found is it's not so much about leadership. It's more around how do you become stewards of that project. So whatever level you are, wherever you are in the organization or in the project, you are a steward of that bigger purpose and understanding that. So that was the first theme. The second one was around creativity. And what was really amazing around this was there was, from architecture and hospitality, both sides said, impossible is nothing, right? Like it's like the only limitation is the imagination. And we can work out any solution, whether it be financially, you've got financial limitations or constraints. There are ways to use creativity to solve for not only built environment and how you change that and transform that, but whatever vision you have, it can be done. Which was it was just like, oh, what opportunity to say, great, you can do whatever you want. Wow. And both sides were really wanting to think about how you then do that. How do we creatively make that work in a pragmatic way? The third area was around tech. And the thing that came out for us there was humane tech. So how do you integrate technology into the built environment in a humane way? So it may not always be the most high tech of solutions. Perhaps opening the window and that automatically turns off the aircon is actually the most humane way of living, getting us back to nature, looking at our health and well-being. How do you get the balance of service into the built environment so that, so that was a really interesting area. The fourth area was around social value, and how do you build social value into guest experiences? So what's the role of, the guest coming to the environment, and what do they learn? What do they take away? What do they, is it about conservation? They get to hang out with animals. Is it about anti-poaching? Is it about food and really getting immersed in that? So what's the actual enlightening guest experience? And then the last area, which was extremely important for both parties, was about people. For service industries, specifically hospitality, are all about people, right? They legacies are built off people in this industry. So how do we help build competence and develop people's skills, whether it be upskill, cross-skill, or higher education? And that was important for architecture as well as hospitality. So they were the 5 threads, and that's what the paper begins to explore. But what we would like to move on to do is say, okay, let's find a test bed that we can start to put some of these in place and prove out.
Exactly, because this is what I wanted actually to know more. Like, okay, now you have these wonderful conclusions and divided to 5 different themes. So how are you going to use it from your side, Shereen? And then from your side, Margaret, how are you going to use it? We can start with you, Shereen.
Yeah, it's exactly carrying on that point about finding test beds. So we have a couple of partners with Royal Park where we can hopefully put some of these ideas into play. So it's right, okay, who are the collaborating partners? So obviously White will be our key partner, and then what do we want to try and test out? What's the actual question? To your point, what's the next question? And then where's the test bed that we can try that out in? And then create a project around that. Hopefully we can apply for either governmental funding or an application of some type to help also the talent within the industry. So we were talking about because hospitality is so about people, can we take people who maybe have been really affected by this, like entrepreneurs or people who were running businesses, and actually help them to run a new test bed with some new thinking around the things that we've uncovered, and then see what happens. So that would be the wish list of the next from our side. Yeah.
Ideally, it would be here in Sweden, even though we have international outreach with this in mind. To specifically, and that would be the next step also, is to really specifically look at as hospitality in Sweden as a case. To narrow it down, because it's quite broad, our research up to now. And
from the built environment, Margaret, how are you going to use the conclusion from this research or case study?
Okay, so from the built environment, I would there's kind of two threads. One is the one that Shereen mentioned, which is more of a test bed, a specific case. And the other side would be, I would take it internally to White, because there are people that have been working with hotels, have those clients, and are currently doing so. So it would be really important to work with not necessarily the people that we interviewed, but another set. So like an internal panel or advisory board, so to speak, to make sure that that it does remain, or it is practice-based research, that it's applicable. So even though we've written for both audiences, we'll start to lift out what exactly is, how can we actually apply this knowledge? And what is so great is that to be this close to the industry is such a luxury from the architect or designer standpoint, or urban planner, to have a daily dialogue with your client and to delve deeper. I think it's a fantastic bed of knowledge. Even if I don't carry on a project myself, I would hope that I could influence or guide another group of people to continue the work, and then to come back and to feed into the knowledge, into the research again. So it becomes circular better knowledge.
Yeah, exactly. And Shereen, because you mentioned in the beginning, about the interviews and people really share their stories from their heart. So now I want to ask you, what is the key of success in this project? What do you think?
What made the project successful? I think it's exactly what you said, that people were there's a step change that's happened about open systems and open collaboration, and that openness and open-mindedness, I think, is critical in terms of how we move forward. And I think that's what made this project really successful in terms of understanding people. So it was I'm a coach as well, and it was just really interesting to apply some of those listening techniques, and you just letting people understand that they're in a safe, trusted environment where openness and open-mindedness and curiosity is celebrated. I think that was probably the success of how the interviews gave us so much richness. And I think another thing that probably made it successful is how Margaret and I work together. We really do. We're good at sort of pushing one another, like understanding how the other's trying to say, and really so that interdisciplinary approach really is amazing. So and the fact that we've got the two from architecture and from hospitality, and hopefully bring in more people as we go along, I think is probably what what we're classing as a success point of the project.
Yeah.
For sure.
What do you think, Margaret?
I can ditto all that. I also think that as buildings change use, function, use, building program changes, we have so many empty buildings out there now, or they will be empty, and functions are changing. I think we can start to see the hospitality, hotel, or destination. What is its role in the community or in an urban environment, and can it play a bigger role, a closer role to the people that live around, or the visitors, or local community, people coming from different areas. I think that this is really key to understanding what does hospitality, what does that mean actually, and it can mean many things, but its role in society, I think, is very interesting, and something that we can look at. What's its role as being a host?
And Margaret, if you go back in time in a time machine, and you will be able to redo one thing in the project, what will you change or redo?
What would I redo? I'm really happy about the process. I think that one way, maybe, we worked on qualitative research, and I think, I don't know if I would repeat it, but I would say if we would continue on this path, work more with quantitative, ask maybe more specific questions to specific people now that we know the threads. And I would also maybe go deeper into certain areas that we've missed because of lack of time. I would like to explore, or we've talked about exploring urban, like the urban landscape, so urban farming and food production. I think that we just sort of touched on that, like how does that factor into this? More delve into understanding more local supply chains and its role in this type of project. I could go on and on.
I can imagine. Maybe this could be like for a new research project as well, like for the future.
Yeah.
Like to have a 2.0, or something like this.
Yeah, exactly. It's interesting that it's there isn't, as we mentioned before, there isn't really an end. It keeps going and going, and I think we'll take it. We'll just navigate it. Like it's important to not have like an end goal, like, or to not. I think in the early stages, maybe we were thinking about our conclusions even before we understood what exactly we were, So to not apply our own conclusions onto the research, to be sort of really open-minded and not try to
shape
not exactly, not try to shape it, just and not turn it into something that we would like it to be. To really, and that involves really listening, to the really honest truth about things, and that's really key. I think we both have a extremely high level of pragmatism in our constitution, where we really want to get the plain, cold, hard truth to start to understand that.
It was really important that we had no agenda in this. Like we agreed at the beginning that we would just ask and listen and see what emerged from that process. Because I think if we hadn't done that, I know for sure I would have been like, oh, it would be this, and this. And I probably would, I actually know now I would have been absolutely wrong.
And I think the original application for funding from White was, can we work together? That was like, okay, that took 5 minutes. They're like, yeah, we know. And then we just rolled with it. So it's been very smooth.
And I think it's very important, the point you mentioned now, that we shouldn't really shape the end of it's a journey, but we shouldn't we should have some idea about the destination, but not like shape it with the detail. So because also I think we might lose the joy during this journey, and if we know everything, okay, so why we are doing it?
Yeah,
exact.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
we ask ourselves a lot, like, okay, so what are we doing this for? Like, why are we doing this? To kind of keep, it's like putting stops along the journey so that we keep that in focus.
yeah. And in this podcast, I talk a lot together with my guest about like the future city, smart city. So I would love also that we talk a little bit about it as well. So Shereen, from your point of view, how do you imagine the future of hospitality? What do you see?
Oh, it's such a loaded question. It's a little bit. I'm not going to not dodge the question, but I'm going to answer it using something that I mentioned before. I think that I think it's three things. I think that hospitality can emerge into something that really does create great social value, and that it has a real purpose behind what it's doing, because it touches so many people's lives. And Margaret mentioned community before. I think it can have a really significant role in the healing or the recreation of what community is. As over time we've had anchors of communities, right? We've had like before we had schools, and then we had churches, and then we had shopping centers, and over time those have sort of they've sort of disappeared in terms of importance within communities. And so can destinations, and I'm specifically using that word destination versus hotel or co-working space or multi-purpose, because a destination can have a greater purpose. And so if that, I feel that from what the destination can create, and if it's created with a good intention and great governance in place, it can actually start to help communities thrive. And it can actually even answer things around food security, right? So if we've got these issues about supply chains breaking down, which we know we have, and maybe for the moment tourism is going to become more domestic, and we have to look at how do we not become insular as countries, but self-sufficient as countries. I think that's probably how the role of hospitality will develop, right? And creating hospitable environments. And that's why this definition of hospitality as a social value is kind of a guide of what we're looking at in terms of what it looks like in the future.
Yeah. Do you think that like the definition of hospitality changes in different countries? Like, say I am from Iraq, will we have like another definition of it, or we will have a common one? What do you think in general?
I hope we have a common one, because hospitable to one another is such a beautiful gift, right? It's like when you're generous with your time and you're generous with your energy and your creativity, it creates such a beautiful hospitable environment. And whether you're entertaining guests, or you're creating music events, or you're providing places to sleep, or to co-work, or whatever the point of the space is, the people within it have a hospitable heart, it becomes a magic place to be. And that I think is a global truth, that when people are good to one another, magic happens. And I think that's not country based, that's just
that's yeah, exactly. I totally agree with you. So Margaret, what do you think? How can we make it smarter, like from your point of view and from your background?
From what became really clear to me, like in the slowdown of the pandemic, was that the use of the positive use of technology to reach out and learn from each other. And I've made so many contacts personally through just joining webinars and contacting or being contacted by somebody afterwards, and finding these common threads, ways of for example, if in one project I could see that this particular neighborhood, that they had come further in their concept towards implementation, how to ask how they did it, and people have been very generous with their knowledge and helping. And even from a couple of people had mentioned that even former competitors, competing hotel chains or asset owners, they actually were asking each other how the other team had, they were helping each other out, sort of, how are you solving this issue? And I think that that's a positive attribute that I hope continues. Because, yeah, so in terms of technology, I think that that is a very positive attribute about it. Not that it will replace personal meeting, but enhance. And enhance its outreach. And it is, of course, more democratic.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your reflection. I really enjoyed this talk with you, and I hope that we will have a follow-up in the future about, okay, how is it going?
Absolutely.
I'd love that.
To. It would be really fun.
And I would love now, like, to finish this episode of this great talk, that you give us 2 takeaway messages to the listeners, each one of you. So we can start with you, Shereen, and also 1 question for us to reflect about.
Okay. I think one thing one key takeaway is just about interconnection, sort of the full circle, this whole circularity theme going on. But just whether it be the word sustainability or regeneration, I personally gravitate towards the word of regeneration, because it also respects that nothing gets wasted, so that, you know, everything is reused. And if we embrace this philosophy, it can actually start to restore things in a really interesting, different way. So if we eliminate the concept of waste from our minds, it actually makes circularity so much more easy. It's like, you know, so that thought that everything transforms itself. And if we look to nature to look at that transformation, then actually it can give us new business approaches, it can give us new business models, it can give us new reflective ways of trusting both cognitive head and intuitive heart. And I think if the thing I'd like to leave everyone with is, if we can marry 3 things together: cognitive business mind, legacy heart, and our environmental body, both the one we live in but what's around us, and we take care of those 3 elements, then hopefully through interconnectivity we can all sort of thrive and regenerate each other and our business world.
Yeah, I see a lot of coaching messages from you.
Subliminal messages. It's also my life philosophy, so that's clearly what's coming through.
I love it. I really love it.
Yeah, and the key question I think is, how can we all live in a regenerative way? There's and I don't mean from like big crazy huge impact of like, oh my god, we've got to go and put in a new water dam into the lake because now we can move the water, you know, not that sort of regeneration. Like, what's a small everyday thing that can make you feel like you're doing your role in change? Yeah.
Very good question, actually. Good one. Good one. Thank you so much, Shereen.
Thank
so,
you.
Margaret, what do you have for us? Takeaway messages, 2 takeaway messages, 1 question as well.
Yeah, how am I going to, like, you know, that one? No, actually, I would like to say 1 word that is really important, is balance. And I think that it's, to add on to Shereen, we learn so much from nature about balance. About how trees communicate with each other under the ground with their roots, and the no waste. So I think balance and sort of stripping things down to the very simple and understanding that. And I think especially when it comes to, we have a lot of codes to guide us in our work as architects and planners. And sometimes it's a shift from a checklist, which our clients are often trying to get this checklist of stuff, to go away from the checklist and think sort of how can we create this balance without being constantly like guided by this checklist, and if that means maybe not having this particular certificate that you want, but the greater good is much higher than the certificate. That's not the reward, the greater balance and purposes. And then my question, it's kind of hypothetical, or it is hypothetical. So this is kind of directed at everybody, and also those. No, what kind of traveler will you be in the future, and what kind of host will you be?
Very interesting. Yeah, very interesting actually. Cool. Thank you so much again. I'm really happy.
Thank you, Mustafa.
I'm really happy to have you in the podcast, and as I mentioned, hopefully see you again. And before we stop the recording, so what is going to be the next step for you? We start with you, Shereen.
In terms of this project, or just in general?
Both, in general and the project.
So I'd love to do a 2.0 on this. Like I said, the test bed, or another research where I agree with Margaret, where it's a little bit more quantitative. So qual meets quant, so we can start to get some numbers behind some of the key sort of themes that we have. And then just in general, to keep really trying to rebuild a conscious, sustainable hospitality industry. It really is, it's an industry I love. Like, just, I've traveled since I was little. Like, it's in my DNA. It's, you know, just that gift of exploring. And if I think of the wonder that I've seen in areas, to be able to make sure that we maintain that for future generations is I'm super passionate about it. I think that I've landed in this specific place for a specific reason in this specific time, and that's what I'll be focusing on for the next however long I'm needed here.
Yeah, so you will combine the three elements, right?
Exactly. I will attempt to.
Yeah, or maybe you're already combining it every day.
Not every day. It's a journey, as you said before.
So, Margaret, what is the next step for you?
My curiosity will continue to guide me, and definitely 2.0 on this work. I'd love to speak to a lot of my colleagues at White that have been asking about what I'm working on, and friends outside of White, of course, to continue to speak about what the work that we're doing, and to get more feedback, and to understand how we can improve it, make it more pragmatic, and also inspire others, and hopefully have others join us on this journey.
Yeah. Thank you so much again.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Such a pleasure.
Well, thank you so much for listening to Urbanistica podcast. I hope you really enjoyed this episode. You learned something new and also got inspired by the guest. Don't forget to share the episode on your social media and recommend it to people you think they are really interested in this topic. Thank you so much again for giving your valuable time to Urbanistica podcast. I am Mustafa Sharif. Keep up the good work. Keep loving cities.